Hello everyone, welcome back to another Tech Tips. My name is Trevor May. I am the VRF and Duct-Free Split Technical Specialist here at Standard Air Lite. And what we're going to be covering on today's Tech Tip is an overview of the new RG-10 wireless handheld remote controller. It's going to be coming standard not only with our newer 40 mAh unit, and if you're unfamiliar with what that new unit is, there is a pre-recorded webinar that will go over the basics of what that unit is and also what has changed versus the previous model, which was the 40 MAQ, but also talking about this wireless controller that's going to come standard with every ductless indoor unit. So if you've attended the 40 MAH webinar, you would be familiarized with the wired controller and the part numbers that are associated with the new wired controller, depending on what indoor unit you're connecting it to. Just as a quick overview, the wired controller, the KSACN 0601 AAA, is compatible with the 40 MAQs, the 40 MHHs, and the 40 MPH high wall style units. The next model for this wired controller, compatibility wise, is our KSACN 0701 AAA, and that is compatible with our ducted style, so the 40 MBDQ, our cassette style, the 40 MBCQ, and then also our floor console style, our 40 MBFQ indoor units. And then finally, the newest addition to the wired controller product line would be the KSACN 0801, and that is strictly compatible with the new 40 MAH high wall indoor unit. Now, to transition over to what we're here to talk about on this particular tech tip is the wired or wireless remote controller, which is our RG-10, which you see on the right side of the screen here. So we'll go over some product features in it, different modes on here so that we get a better understanding, so that when customers are asking us questions about what the remote does, what do all these buttons do, we'll be able to provide them with the correct answer so that they can control the system properly and also understand how the system does work. So the first thing we'll go over is the sleep function on here. So the sleep function, unlike on the older wireless handheld remote controller, on the new one, we are now going to press our set button. So we press the set button and you'll see a display come up on this screen with a little moon icon and a star indicating that this is the sleep function. When you see this after pressing the set button 2 times on there, you'll see this little moon icon, and then you want to take and point the wireless controller at the indoor unit and hit the OK button to confirm or send that command to force that unit into sleep mode. Now, what the sleep is, it is available in cooling, heating, or in the auto modes. Now, in the cooling mode, the set point will increase 2 degrees every hour for 2 hours, not to exceed 85 degrees. Now, if that indoor temperature goes over 85 degrees, it will then kick on cooling to bring it back down to 85 and then resume holding 85 or below. The indoor fan is fixed at a low speed during the sleep mode and the cooling mode. In the heating mode, the set point will do the exact opposite, so it's going to decrease 2 degrees every hour for 2 hours, not to go below 62 degrees. If it goes below 62 degrees, it'll bring on the unit, warm it back up to 62, and maintain that threshold. That indoor fan is also fixed at a low speed, and the anti-cold air function has priority. So the anti-cold air function, for those of you that aren't familiar, is essentially Carrier's way of saying, look, we're not going to immediately kick on the indoor fan when we go into a call for heat because that coil's not warmed up, which means we could blow cold air on the customer. So what we do is we look at our T2 or our coil temperature sensor on that indoor unit to dictate when that fan speed goes into low, medium, or high. And essentially what that means in sleep mode is that function is still valid, and that indoor fan's not going to kick on until that coil temperature has reached a certain degree for high speed to be able to make sure that we're not blowing cold air on that customer. Now, in the auto mode, both of these rules apply. So in cooling and in heating mode, we're not going to allow the set point to go above 85 degrees or go below 62 degrees. And depending on what we need, that set point will increase or decrease 2 degrees every hour for 2 hours, not to exceed those thresholds that I just mentioned. Okay, and then finally, after 7 hours in sleep mode, the system will return to its original set point and fan speed. Now, I will advise you, this is something that I do not recommend that your customers do, depending on their comfort level. As you can obviously tell, as I went through the different explanations of how the system is controlled in this particular mode, if the space is getting up to 85 degrees or going down to 62 degrees, you're going to have an uncomfortable temperature at home, especially if there is somebody in the home when they activate this, hence if they would go to sleep or if they would leave for vacation. Okay, now this obviously creates issues within the space where we have a high temperature or a low temperature, and we have quite a bit of load to either heat or cool. Okay, again, this is something that you want to educate the customer on and recommend to them based on their particular needs. Of course, this isn't going to be for everybody. Okay, so the next one is going to be one of the newest features on our 40 MAH unit, and is only going to be applicable on the 40 MAH unit as it stands right now. So this is going to be enabling the occupancy sensor. So on this new wireless remote control, you'll see your little I button on there. That is for not I feel, that is for the actual occupancy sensor to detect people in the room. Okay, so what we want to do is press the I button on that wireless remote controller to enable that occupancy sensor that's built in on that new 40 MAH high wall unit to become active. Okay, when that command was accepted, you'll hear an audible beep on top of seeing a little eye icon on the digital screen on the right-hand side of the wireless remote controller. Once in the occupancy sensing mode, the sensor will determine if there are people in the space and whether or not to set back the room temp accordingly. Okay, and it is important to note with the occupancy sensing mode, while it is a really great feature and it sounds wonderful, if the customer has this in a bedroom and they put it on an occupancy sensing mode, when they lay down for the evening and their movement is at a minimum and the unit does not detect movement in the space, it's going to set back the temperature in the room itself, which could create warm or cold conditions depending on the time of the year. So it's certainly something that you want to advise the customer of. While it is a great feature and it's marketed very well, this mode is not going to be for everybody. So our typical modes, just like we had on our traditional RG-57 or the older wireless handheld remote controller. So the first one is going to be for our silent mode. So what you're going to do with the silent mode is you're going to press the fan button for 2 seconds or longer on the remote control to activate the silent mode. Okay, when the silent mode is activated, you'll see a little person icon with an additional icon. It looks like a finger that's going over the mouth to hush. That essentially indicates that the command was sent to the indoor unit to put this in a silent mode. When the silent mode is active, the indoor fan will run at the minimum fan speed, and the condenser fan motor will be running at minimum fan speed. The compressor will be running at a very limited frequency or very limited speed, which means if they decide to do this when we're in peak load conditions, let's just say middle of July, beginning of August, when we're experiencing 90, 95 degree outside air temperature consistently, when you turn down the speed of the indoor fan, the outdoor fan, and the compressor, you limit capacity. So while the system may be silent or quiet as to not disturb somebody, you're also limiting the capacity the system can deliver, especially on those peak times of year. Now, if that silent mode is initiated, turbo mode, 46-degree heating where that setback, or the sleep mode will be canceled. And in order to exit the silent mode, you can press any button and that will get you out of your silent mode on the wireless remote controller. Now the next mode on there is going to be our dry mode, which essentially is on the older style, what I always call it a poor man's humidity control. What you're looking for when you hit the mode button is a little water droplet. And what this does essentially is gets the cooling to whatever set point that you have, but it's going to keep the fan speed at a low speed in order to produce a colder coil. So we're not passing air as quickly over that coil so that we have the more potential to remove more moisture from the space. Okay, now this kind of leads me into my next segue, which is going to be for humidity control. So now we have built-in relative humidity control for the space. Okay, so we can choose a set point and set a particular percentage of humidity that we're trying to maintain, whether that be 50%, 55%, 45%, depending on the scenario. Now what you're going to do on the wireless handheld remote controller is press the humidity button. You're going to hear an audible beep, just like anytime you send a command to an indoor unit. You can control this in increments of 5% on the wireless handheld remote controller. On the app, carrier out. If you have Wi-Fi enabled, you can control it in increments of 1%. Okay. Now, once you found the percentage that you want to adjust the unit to, go ahead and point the wireless controller at the indoor unit and hit the OK button on there to send a command to the indoor unit. And what you're listening for is an audible beep to make sure that that command was sent and received by that indoor unit. So now what this does essentially is allows us to be able to focus not only on the sensible load, but also on the latent load for a much more precise comfort control for that customer space and or spaces. So turbo mode on here, what you're going to want to push on the wireless remote controller is the boost button, which is a reference into turbo. When you press this boost button, if you look on the right-hand side of the screen here, you'll see 2 forward arrows on there indicating something being boosted. That's how you know that this is going to be active in the turbo mode. Also, when you hear an audible beep from the indoor unit when you press this boost button. Okay, so this is available in cooling, heating, and in the auto mode. Okay, so we know the turbo mode is activated by pressing the boost button on the remote control. That indoor fan is going to be fixed at a high speed or a turbo fan speed. Compressor is going to be running at full modulation. Same thing with outdoor fan motor. So essentially what the turbo mode is whatever set point you pick, whether it be 72, 68, 70, 76, depending on the mode that you're in. The system has 30 minutes to try to reach that set point running the system in full modulation. Okay, if it can't reach that set point in 30 minutes, it doesn't throw an error code. It just goes back to the original set point, fan speed, and configuration that you've had prior to entering turbo mode. So turbo mode is essentially focused on the sensible load and not the latent load. Okay, so once you're in turbo mode, what are some things that the customer may accidentally do that may take it out of turbo mode? So if they press the boost button again, okay, if they turn the unit off, or if they change modes. So it's important to note on there when you're explaining this to the customer that you want to make sure that they're not pressing any other buttons, namely being turning the unit off by mistake, changing a mode, or accidentally pressing the boost button, because that will take it out of turbo mode. And it also can be audibly heard when the machine slowly starts to ramp down, or if you do not see your icon right over here on your wireless handheld controller. Follow me function. So to enable the follow me on this, what you're going to do is press your set button, and then you're going to look for a little person icon on there. Once you see your little person icon on your screen, you're going to go ahead and point the wireless controller at the indoor unit and hit the OK. You're going to hear an audible beep followed by the set temperature, which you see displayed here, and then a corresponding room temperature, which it'll toggle between to let you know what the room temperature is. So unlike the previous wireless remote controller, we hit the follow me and sometimes we could fall in and out of this. This wireless controller locks it into follow me mode to try to prevent that signal interference on there. However, we still rely on line of sight communication because we are reading temperature with a wireless handheld remote controller. So it's important to keep that wireless controller within visual distance with nothing blocking it to the indoor unit. Okay. Now, for some odd reason that this follow me mode just doesn't communicate or it does default back, the default sensing method on this unit is going to be like any other unit, the T1 or your return air sensor. So newer feature on here that comes with the intelligence of this unit is called the breeze away, which essentially is going to get away from the fan speed blowing directly on the customer so that it's not overcooling them depending on what the fan speed's on. Okay, so what you're going to do is press your set button on the remote like we did before to enter in the follow me. But now what we're looking for is the person icon with 3 little lines that's going to represent wind blowing towards that person. Once you see that icon, you're going to go ahead and press OK. And once you hit OK on there, you're going to hear an audible beep, and then this mode becomes effective. And what it's going to do is it's going to now allow that system to direct that wind away from you to prevent overcooling to the occupants of the space by having that cold air blown on them, so it's a much more even comfort. Now, some people like that air blowing on them. And again, this is, again, one of those modes that's not going to be for everybody, but something to certainly inform the customer of and also recommend based on what you know about your customer. Next mode we're going to talk about is our self-clean function. Okay, so on this, just like we did with the prior 2 modes, we're going to go ahead and hit the set button on there. And what we're going to be looking for is the two little stars with lines through them on there that kind of indicate something shining, like something's been cleaned. Okay, once you see that icon, which you see right here below the self-clean function description, you're going to point the wireless controller at the indoor unit, hit the OK button to send that command to the indoor unit, and listen for the audible beep. Once that audible beep is confirmed, you're going to see an SC for self-clean displayed on the high wall style units. Now, if you don't have a digital display, this isn't going to come up. Okay, so when you are in this active clean or self-clean function, okay, the unit's going to run its fan mode after it comes out of call for cooling for 13 minutes at low speed. Then it's going to energize that reversing valve and then run the system in heating mode, sending hot gas to dry out that indoor coil for 1 minute at a low fan speed. Then it will de-energize the reversing valve and then only run that fan for 2 minutes at low speed. Finally, that unit will turn off, okay, and come out of this mode. Essentially, what we're doing is with the self-clean function is to be able to prevent organic growth, mildew, or any funky smells from building up on that interior coil because of the moisture that naturally occurs during cooling operation. This does not take the place of cleaning coils and routine maintenance, but depending on your customer, may be something that you want to recommend to them based on their lifestyle. Okay, it's also important too to understand that the customers may think that this means it cleans the filter by itself, and that is not the case. They still need to do their due diligence, take the filters out, lightly dust them and clear away anything that's impacting them, and then put them back in. Okay, so when we're in this active clean, no response to any other buttons besides clean or the off button will be applicable, which means if you hit the clean button again or the set button, go in here and hit the OK, or if you hit the off button, that's the only thing that's going to allow you to essentially take it out. Okay, so in order to quit this function, what do we need to do? Well, we could turn the system off by hitting the on and off button, or we could press the set button again to take us out of this self-clean mode. Next feature we're going to talk about is our 46-degree heating setback. Okay, so this is also known as FP or freeze protection. Okay, with this freeze protection, what we're going to do is we're going to go in the heating mode, obviously, because this is the only mode that it's applicable in. Once we're in the heating mode, we're going to turn the set point down to its lowest set point that it can go, 60 degrees. Once we've gotten to 60 degrees, we're then going to go ahead and press the down arrow twice within 1 second to be able to initiate this setback on there. Now, when the setback is initiated, you're going to hear an audible beep from the unit. If your unit has a digital display, it will display an FP for freeze protection. If it's a ducted style or a cassette style unit without a digital display or access to it, all you're going to listen for is an audible beep. Okay, if you don't hear an audible beep, obviously the command wasn't accepted and it's not going to go into the setback function. So in this setback function, that indoor fan is fixed at a medium speed. The anti-cold air function is void, which means it's not going to wait for that coil to warm up essentially when it needs heat. If it goes below 46, it's just going to kick the fan on. The unit will exit this setback mode when any button on the remote control is pressed. So it's important to know that the customers don't accidentally press buttons after setting it in this specific feature. Otherwise, it will take it out. Okay. And a nice unique feature, if power loss does occur, you don't have to worry about re-enabling this mode as it automatically saves. So if you have a power outage and the power comes on an hour and a half later, the system finally comes back on, this is still going to be in freeze protection. Now, I have tested these up for about 3 hours that it stayed in freeze protection. After 3 hours, it was about 3 hours and 15 minutes. The system did reset itself and it actually had to be manually re-enabled. So it depends on the severity of the power outage and how long it's out for that it will maintain that mode. But I can say roughly for sure, at least 2 hours. Okay. One thing to note about the 46-degree heating setback function on here that's very misleading is that when this is put into place and the unit is set back to allow the temperature to fall to 46 degrees. When this goes below 46 degrees, we'll just say it went to 44 degrees. The system kicks on and starts to run heat. It does not maintain 46 degrees. What it does do is go to the lowest set point that we have for these systems, which on this newer style is 60 degrees. So what does that mean? Well, indoor temp fell to 44. heat kicks on. It's going to warm the space up to 60 degrees, satisfy at that 60 degrees, shut off, and then let the temperature fall back down to 46 degrees again. Okay. So usually what I tell guys is that the setback modes on ductless really don't save you much money. And here's the reasoning behind it. With these systems, because they are inverter based, they are only drawing the amount of power necessary to be able to heat or cool that space. So if it's wintertime and we're allowing a space to go down to, let's just say 48 degrees, and the system never kicks on, and then you come back in there and you want to start doing work, whether it's a garage or just an area that really doesn't have to be maintained or that is temperature critical. If we have 48 degree space temperature and you want to bring it up to 65 degrees, you've got a heck of a threshold that you've got to catch up on. So that system's going to be doing a lot of work. It's going to be pulling a lot of power, okay, depending on how much we ramp up that compressor. Versus if we set it back a couple degrees and let that inverter do what it does best and maintain. It's a lot cheaper to maintain temperature than it is to try to run a machine at full frequency to catch up from a 48 degree room temperature to a 65 degree room temperature. So it's important to note, not only for our own understanding, but for the customer's understanding, that these operate much differently than any traditional system that we're used to dealing with, especially with garage applications where unit heaters or maybe electric heat was the source of heating for the space, and they want to leverage having a ductless system and the energy efficiency that comes with it. So it's important that we just make customers aware of that, and also us as technicians, service guys, depending on what you're doing in the company, install, to understand what this actually means and to educate the customer properly. All right. So we went over the different modes on there. The last thing that I want to discuss with you guys is the different ways that now we are getting into our advanced function control and our point check function control with this new RG-10 wireless handheld remote. So let's start with the point check function. So how do we get in the point check function on the new wireless remote controller? We're going to go ahead and press the on and off button and fan button simultaneously and hold them in for 5 seconds. Okay. What you're going to see pop up after that 5 seconds is going to be a number 1. From there, you can adjust using your up arrow and down arrow to 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. What that is essentially in reference to is T1, return air sensor. Number 2 is T2 for indoor coil temperature. T3 for outdoor air temperature, okay, depending on the situation. Excuse me, T3 is actually outdoor coil temperature. T4 is outdoor air temperature. Okay. So it's important to note on here that we have a different functionality on how we get into this versus the older style. So we're pressing the on and off and the fan button simultaneously together for 5 seconds to get into this point check function. So why do we care about getting into this point check function? Well, this is a great way on the high wall units only. So units that have a digital display where we can see what the actual unit is reading for return air temperature and coil temperature, depending on if we're troubleshooting or if we're looking to get a ballpark idea of the delta T or return air versus supply air for these units in order to check charge, or if we're just doing routine maintenance, all while not having to take the unit apart and only having the knowledge right now that we have, plus our wireless controllers to access it. Okay. So the next video that I have for you is going to show you an actual live demonstration of what you should expect to see on the wireless controller, and then we'll discuss what you should see on the indoor unit, specifically with the new 40 M8H. Okay, so now we know what to expect on our wireless handheld remote controller. Now, when we set this feature up and get into it via the wireless controller, what you're going to see pop up on the indoor unit is going to be what looks like an R1, but that's because of how that digital display reads out T1. T1 is our return air temperature. Okay, T2 is our indoor coil temperature. T3 is our outdoor coil temperature. T4 is our outdoor air temperature. which all on the high wall unit will be R1, R2, R3. So it's important to note on there, if you're like, what is R1? Well, in reality, that's not R1, that's actually T1. So just to make sure that you guys are aware of that, but let's take a look at what we should expect to see. Okay, so now we know that we're going to see those R values come up. You may have noticed that there was a number out of there that said 75 or 34. That is a temperature in degrees Celsius. You need to make sure that you convert over into degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I have done a few tests on these new 40 mAh units. They should display in degrees Fahrenheit now. However, if you do get a number that seems awfully odd, chances are you are probably getting a degree Celsius, especially if it's reading 30-something degrees and it's in the heating mode for oil temperature. Okay, so again, they should read out as a default in Fahrenheit now with the new product update. However, that doesn't always necessarily mean everything's perfect, and sometimes we have issues with the software. So it's important to note, if you're getting a temperature in degrees Celsius and you suspect it depending on the mode, make sure that you convert over to Fahrenheit. And then finally, the advanced control menu. So why do we care about getting to the advanced control menu? Well, there's a bunch of different features that we can essentially customize this indoor unit for depending on the application. For example, we can shut fan speeds off after set point. We can program offsets on temperature sensors in a negative or positive fashion depending on if the unit's overheating or underheating, overcooling or undercooling. Okay, so what we're going to do is just like we did on the other wireless remote controller, aside from the buttons that we're going to press. So first, we want to make sure that not only do we take the batteries out of the controller for the wireless handheld remote controller, hit the on and off button to clear the screen, but we also want to make sure that we power cycle the entire system itself. So shut everything off either at the breaker or before your disconnect, wait for 30 seconds, plug it back in. At the same time, make sure you put your battery back in your wireless controller, and then you're going to press the mode button and the fan symbol button, and together simultaneously and hold for 5 seconds. You'll see an F1 come up on your remote, and this indicates to you that you've successfully entered into this advanced control menu. You can use your up and down arrows to navigate through different F codes, E codes, D codes. There's an entire manual that goes through and essentially will navigate you through different codes depending on what you're looking to change. Okay. Once you get into the specific code that you want, for example, we'll just say we're going to F4, which is for shutting the fan speed off after set point. Once you use your temperature up and down to navigate to F4, you want to hit the set button to enter into that F4 menu. You'll then see a 1, 2, 3, 4 come up on F4 in particular, since we're talking about it when you hit the set. That's the sub menu within F4. You then want to make your changes based on the service manual that you'll have for the advanced control functions. And if you don't have that manual, you're always more than welcome to shoot me an email or give me a call, and I'd be happy to send that over to you or to guide you through which code that you need to change, what option, depending on the application. Okay, but once you found the number that you want to get to within that F4, in this case, we're going to set it to 1, which means to shut the fan speed off. When you see that 1 on your screen, you want to point that wireless controller at the indoor unit and hit the OK button. Once you hit the OK button, you'll hear an audible beep, followed by a 0-1 if you change it to a 1. If you change it to a 2, it'll come up with a 0-2 if you have a digital display on the high wall units. On non-high wall units, you will not see this. What you will hear is an audible beep, and that will be your confirmation that the command is sent to the unit and received. Okay, and it's important to note, if you do not hear a beep, you did not make a change to the system. Make sure too, if you have power cycled the system and you've taken the battery out of the backside of the controller, cleared the screen, put it back in, and having issues getting the wireless controller to send a signal to the unit, your last resort should be able to press the on and off button to resync that wireless controller to that indoor unit and then try again. If that doesn't get you anywhere, I would suggest you calling into our tech support so that we could further assist you with any issues that you might have. Okay, so let's take a look at basically what I just covered, a little bit more easier to understand format, something with a pre-recorded video. So let's take a look. Okay, so hopefully that gave you a better understanding of how to access some of this advanced function menu. And again, as I stated before, there is a service manual that is specifically associated with the F codes, E codes, and D codes that we use to custom program these units. So if you don't have that, you have any more questions on it, you're always more than welcome to pick up the phone or shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have on this specific mode. So as I do with every tech tip on here, here's my contact information, phone number, direct extension, and email, depending on whether you want to shoot me an email or call me directly. And I always like to remind you guys that while I am your first point of contact, I'm not your only point of contact for VRF or ductless technical support. If for some reason, if I'm out of office, on vacation, sick, whatever the circumstance may be, there are 3 other gentlemen in the technical service department that'd be happy to help you with any of your technical support needs on ductless and or VRF systems. Their names and extensions are listed there. Also, if you need to get a hold of any product manager, whether it be for ductless or VRF, their names and contact information are listed on the slide as well. I thank you guys for attending this tech tip. Hopefully you gained some little bit better insight on what to expect with this new RG-10 wireless remote controller. Hopefully you can go out there and answer any of your customers' questions on this new wireless controller, and also how to use it from a service perspective to get into how to program the system and also leverage to read temperature sensors without tearing apart the unit or elevating anything out. Look forward to seeing you guys on the next tech tip, and take care.